Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Beautiful Thread podcast. I'm your host, Amaryllis, and welcome back to everyone who's been here already. Thank you so much, whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, for spending any amount of time with me. I really and truly appreciate it. I appreciate you, each and every one of you. So yeah, welcome. How's everyone doing? I hope you're doing well. Yeah, yeah. So, today I really want to talk about anxiety, but I want to talk about just like change, right? Sudden change, big change, and change that is like seemingly out of our control. Times of transition, times where you have a sense that things are going in a different direction, but you can't really articulate it. I feel like that may be a lot of us right now. That is definitely me right now. Lots of changes, lots of things that look different than they used to. Sudden changes, big changes, significant changes that impact daily life and impact my family and my relationships. So, yeah, a lot of changes have been happening. And so I want to talk about that. I want to talk about that because as changes have been happening, I have been trying my best to hold on tightly to the Word of God and to sit at the feet of Jesus. That's what I talked about in the last podcast. Really trying to position myself in a way where I am like before the Lord and listening to His Word in this time of uncertainty, because I found that when I try to lean into my own understanding, right? When I try to lean into how I can make sense of this or that or what's happening here or there, I end up falling short and really just falling into anxiety, like giving into anxiety. So yeah, I want to talk about that because I feel like a lot of people can relate to this. I mean, if you're in the Western world, in the US, we just went through, transitioning to a new presidency. And with that comes a lot of changes. And so I feel like, there can be mass uncertainty with big changes like that as well. So, yeah, let's talk about it. I will tell you guys a little bit of my story the past few weeks. I kind of touched on this in the last podcast, but a lot has been changing. And, even at work, for anyone who's like a working person, a working parent, your livelihood comes from your job. When things change drastically, like it can be a big stressor. And for me, there were a lot of changes that impacted me and my family and just our day-to-day routines and schedules that we were not really tracking for or expecting. And so, I kind of fell into like a sadness because one of the changes meant that I wouldn't be able to see my children as often as I was because the schedule I had, now my schedule is totally different. And so, and it doesn't allow for me to be able to work from home anymore. And, there was such a joy to be able to have that flexibility, work-life balance, but also to just be able to see my kids a lot more, to do the drop-offs, to do the pickups. These are like mundane, routine, everyday things, but I take a lot of joy in that, being able to be a part of the mornings and the afternoons, and like I don't take that for granted. And so that kind of felt like it was being taken away from me, and I was grieving that loss. And grief turned into anxiety turned into panic, and I had a lot of panic-filled days where my mind and my thoughts were spiraling, and also physically manifesting, like, just having shortness of breath and feeling kind of like a lot of weight in my chest and my shoulders and feeling antsy, like I wasn't sure where to go or what to do. I experienced a lot of that, right? And this is something that I've shared before because of different things that have occurred in my life, and I'm sure a lot of you can relate to this as well. Different childhood trauma, it has manifested itself in this way in my later life, in sometimes experiencing panic and anxiety. And I also shared previously that I was diagnosed with PTSD. And so these things are they all kind of work together, right? And so this big change triggered those feelings, right? Those emotions, those big waves of emotions. And I found myself just really like needing to find something to hold on to, especially in the word. And so that's what I'm going to read from today. I'm going to read from Luke 12 and 22. Before I get into that, I just want to say that I do not intend to oversimplify anybody's diagnosis, or if anyone has anxiety or experiences panic attacks, or is like on medication for it or whatever. My intent today is not to oversimplify. I just want to tell my story and shed some light on what the word says about this. Because one thing I do like to remind everyone on here is that we serve a God, right? We serve a king, a high priest, Jesus, the ultimate high priest, who experienced every temptation we have, every feeling, every emotion, but without sin. So we serve a God who we can come to boldly in our times of need. We can approach his heavenly throne in our times of need because he knows exactly what we're feeling, and he can answer those things for us. He has words for these things when we don't. He has the healing we need when we can't find it anywhere. He's the one who we can go to. And so I just say all that to say, like, none of this is to like oversimplify, but it's just to encourage us to lean into the Lord, into what he's said about these things that concern us, and into his heart that really cares about us. The word in Romans 8 talks about how Jesus is an advocate. He's an intercessor. He intercedes for us. And 1 John also talks about Jesus as our advocate. He's the one in between. Like he goes before us. He fights for us. Like he speaks on our behalf to the Father. Like that's his position. He loves us that much, and he invites us to come to him with all these things because he knows what it is. He knows how it feels. But he can deliver us from these things because he was never sinful in the things that he experienced while he was in human flesh here on the earth. You can also find that in John chapter 1 about how Jesus became flesh and he dwelt among us. So that's Hebrews 4 about us having a great high priest who experienced all the things we have but without sin. You can read about him being an advocate or an intercessor in Romans 8 and also 1 John. You can also read about him being the Word, becoming flesh and dwelling among us in John chapter 1. So I just want to encourage us, as I get into what I'm going to read, I just want to encourage us to like lean into what Jesus has to say about our human condition, about our earthly struggles and battles. Okay? So I've been running through the Gospels. Like I've been reading the Gospels just like chapter by chapter. I'm in Luke right now. And in Luke 12, there was this passage that really helped me a lot. But when I first read it, it kind of was like, Like, I kind of looked at it and I was like, because there's a subtitle here that says The Cure for Anxiety. And there was almost like a little part of me that was like the cure. As someone who experiences anxiety, right? Like, I'm like, the cure? Like, what you mean? Like, this could just go away? Like, it was a part of me, and I'm gonna just be real, that was kind of like, I don't know if it was like offense or if it was just like is it just that easy? Like, that kind of thing, you know? And of course I laid that down right there. Like, Lord, this is the feeling I have right now, like reading this, like, what is this? And let me just read it. So this is Luke 12:22. It says, "Then he said to his disciples, 'Therefore I tell you, don't worry about your life, what you will eat, or about the body, what you will wear. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothing. Consider the ravens. They don't sow or reap. They don't have a storeroom or a barn, yet God feeds them. Aren't you worth much more than the birds? Can any of you add one moment to his lifespan by worrying? If then you are not able to do even a little thing, why worry about the rest? Consider how the wildflowers grow. They don't labor or spin thread. Yet I tell you, not even Solomon in all his splendor was adorned like one of these. If that's how God clothes the grass, which is in the field today and then thrown into the furnace tomorrow, how much more will he do for you, you of little faith? Don't strive for what you should eat and what you should drink, and don't be anxious. For the Gentile world eagerly seeks all these things, and your Father knows that you need them. But seek his kingdom, and these things will be provided for you. Don't be afraid, little flock, because your Father delights to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give to the poor. Make money bags for yourselves that won't grow old, an inexhaustible treasure in heaven, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." So that part in verse 29 that says, "Don't be anxious," was kind of like, okay, don't be anxious. But I mean, I'm sure you know what I mean when I say, like, how do you just not be anxious? Like, what do you mean? Like, what do you mean here? And so it's necessary when you're reading scripture to read in context, right? And so if this is just part of this chapter, but when you read right before verse 22, the parable of the rich fool, it starts in verse 13 and it ends at 21. When you read right before that, Jesus tells a parable about a rich man who stored up all these things for himself, right? And he put so much of his value, his identity, his pride in his possessions that when he ran out of room, he's like, well, where am I going to put all my things? And he said, oh, I know, I'll build some more storehouses, right? To store all these things. And then he decides that he's going to store up all these things, and then he's going to eat and drink and enjoy himself for the rest of his life because he has nothing to worry about. And then Jesus goes on to say in the parable, the Lord comes to this man and says, "You fool, this very night your life is required of you. Now what are you going to do with all this stuff that you have stored up?" And then it says, that's how it is with the one who stores up treasure for himself and is not rich towards God. And so then he talks about the cure for anxiety. And at the end of Jesus talking about the cure for anxiety, he says, sell your possessions and give to the poor. Make money bags for yourselves that won't grow old, an inexhaustible treasure in heaven. For no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And so now I'm going to cross-reference a non-biblical source. This is the American Psychological Association, their definition of anxiety. It says, anxiety is an emotion characterized by feelings of tension, worried thoughts, and physical changes like increased blood pressure. Anxiety, excuse me, this threw me for a loop. Anxiety is not the same as fear, but they are often used interchangeably. Anxiety is considered a future-oriented, long-acting response broadly focused on a diffuse threat, whereas fear is an appropriate, present-oriented, and short-lived response to a clearly identifiable and specific threat. So the differences between anxiety and fear, one is future-oriented, which is anxiety, and fear, which can be healthy and actually prevent you from danger, is present-oriented and it's short-lived. Anxiety is future-oriented and is long-acting. And it says it's broadly focused on a diffuse threat. So a diffuse threat is a threat that's just like widespread, very vague, right? Non-specific, right? And fear is like a very clearly identifiable and specific threat. So the reason why anxiety is diffuse or non-specific is because anxiety literally like tries to project you into the future and makes you afraid of what might happen. So it's not actually based on facts, right? It's not based on a clear and present danger and threat right in front of you. It's like literally going into the future and saying, you know what, if this happens, then X, Y, Z. And so now I am anxious because of the future, right? So if you think about that in relation to this passage of scripture, the man who stored up all these goods for himself, right? His his heart and his belief and his attention, right? And his vision was like cast way into the future. He's storing up all these things for himself so that he can secure himself now for the future, right? So that he doesn't have to, be bothered with, anything but eating and drinking and being merry, right? And you look at that guy and you don't think, well, he doesn't seem anxious, right? But why else would he store up all these things for himself unless he was afraid that he was going to lose them? That's what I think. Why else would he store up these things for himself? Unless he was trying to secure his future, right? And so then it says here, Jesus said, seek the kingdom and all these things will be provided for you. Don't worry yourself about what you're going to eat and what you're going to wear, right? And then he says, make yourselves treasures that won't grow old, treasure in heaven, where no thieves can come near it and no moth will destroy it, right? And it says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So this man, right before this parable or the cure for anxiety, this man was storing up treasures, right? And that's where his heart was. His heart was in those treasures and making himself feel secure, right? And in deceiving himself into thinking that he had secured his future. And then the Lord came and said, well, guess what? Your life is ending today. Now what are you going to do? Could you imagine, right, if that man, if his heart and his treasure was found in the Lord, in the kingdom of heaven, right? The goods that he had, I'm sure he would have given to the poor, or he would have made use of them, right? If he was actually living now in the present with the awareness of the Lord and what the Lord wants, what the Lord requires, and the Lord's heart for him, and believing that the Lord would provide everything that he needed, right? So to connect all these things together, I hope I'm not painting too broadly, but I believe that anxiety can have a tighter grip on us than it needs to when our hearts are not positioned in the right place. And this is going back to what I said in the last podcast about the position of our hearts, right? At that time, I was talking about Mary and Martha. where Mary chose to sit at the feet of Jesus and Martha was busy with all her tasks. She was worried and she was upset about her many tasks. And so she didn't make the same choice that Martha did to sit at the feet of Jesus. She had to have control over what she was doing. She had to finish this job because there was some sense of security in knowing that she had served the master well with all her doing, right? But Jesus said, no, Mary has chosen the best part, to sit right here. That's where your best service is sitting at the feet of Jesus and being aware of his presence and being concerned with the things of Jesus, with the things of God, with the things of the kingdom of heaven. And so anxiety can have a great hold on us when we are concerned with earthly things over heavenly things, when our heart is more invested in earthly things than heavenly things. Because in our human condition, we cannot secure for ourselves anything for the future because our lives are not our own. And the master may come tonight and say, hey, your life is required of you this very moment. Now, what are you going to do? Anxiety deceives us into thinking that we have some sort of control over the future or what happens. And so it'll project us to the future and make us worry about the things that might happen, a very broad scope of different outcomes and possibilities, right? And it deceives us into robbing us of our contentment to live in the here and now, in the presence of Jesus, right? In sitting at his feet and in sitting at his feet and serving him and being in his presence, right? And surrendering all the feelings and emotions and things that we have right in the here and now. That's where we start to build up for ourselves treasures in heaven that no one can ever take away from us. When we try to invest so much of ourselves in controlling the outcomes, right, of our lives, of our days, in investing ourselves in like the things that are tangible to us here on the earth, those things can be taken from us. Like those things can, it says where moth won't destroy. Like moths, when they come, they'll come and they'll eat everything up. Like it will, like things here on earth are very temporal, right? They can get damaged, they can get worn, they can eventually fade away, right? And when we put our heart and our intention and our desires into these temporary earthly things, that's when anxiety can really take a big hold on us. It can shift our gaze to the things that we can't control. It can shift our gaze into the future that's not even certain for anyone. Nobody knows when Jesus is coming back. Nobody knows when their life is going to be, over. Like no one has any idea. And so, though when I read this, I felt like this is a bold claim to tell me don't be anxious. But it's actually a very practical thing to say. It's actually, I think that it's more impractical to think that if you suffer with anxiety, you have to live with it for the rest of your life. I think it's more impractical to think that you can never be free from worrying about the future. And we can become so familiar with our human condition, with our, our experiences with anxiety and panic. And I'm talking to myself. I'm talking about myself. We can become so familiar with these things that when we read something that the Lord said, it can be like, excuse me? But did you know that? Don't you see that? Can't you tell that? Like, look at me. I'm crying. I'm hyperventilating. I'm spiraling out of control. I'm doing this. I'm smoking this. I'm drinking this. I'm with this person and nothing's working. Can't you see this is not easy? Jesus never said it was easy. But he's given us a way to have freedom. He is the way to freedom. And so if he is the way and he's giving you direction, then why wouldn't we follow it? He is the only way. And so if I'm going anywhere, I'm going in that direction, to the only way to eternal life, the only way to true freedom, the only way to salvation, Jesus. So if he said it in his word, that means 1, it's possible. That means 2, it will never fail and it won't return to him empty, whatever he said. And that also means 3, he's invested in freeing you and helping you in the process. And so all this to say, I want us to be free from anxiety. I want to be free from anxiety in a world, in a culture where things are uncertain, right? Where information is being given to us second by second by second, right? And it prompts us into anxiety, right? There are big media and organizations and influencers and people on these platforms that benefit off of you being anxious and consistently consuming the information that they have to give you. They benefit and they profit off of that, right? There's a lot of information we've been given and we're being fed, right? And not all of it is truth. And so we have to choose this day what we're going to follow. The instructions of Christ: don't be anxious, seek first the kingdom. God desires to give you the kingdom. He knows what you have need of before you ask for it. Consider the wildflowers. He cares about flowers that today are alive, tomorrow they get burned in the fire. Like, how much more does he care for you? How much more will he do for you? Let's choose this day who we're going to follow, what we're going to follow, and let's believe that if the Lord told us not to be anxious, then he can free us from it. And it may look different for everyone. He may hold your hand through it. He may walk you through it moment by moment, day by day. You may be free in an instant, or it might take a little while. But let us choose today to follow the wisdom and the direction and the truth of Jesus, who is the only way, the truth, and the life. Let's follow him. Join me in this journey on being free from anxiety. We can do it together. I love you all. I can't wait to talk to you in the next one. Thank you so much for watching.